understatement. Sometimes it feels like my life is something straight out of a mystery detective novel. I'm not really like other teenagers. For one, I've never been to school. My mom died when I was just a little boy, and so it's always just been me and my dad. He's an archaeologist, so for as long as I can remember, we've been traveling and exploring, and so school for me has always been something I've done on the road. I could honestly tell you more about the ancient world than any book could. And because of my dad's obsession with Egypt and the pyramids, I know a lot too. My dad taught me everything I know, and watching him speak to me about his love and passion for the pyramids was so infectious. It was inevitable that I'd fall in love with them too. There was one particular pyramid that he was drawn to. No one had ever been inside the tomb deep within it, but my dad talked about it all the time. He said that if he could get inside, he'd become the world's most famous archaeologist. But there was just one problem. The pyramid contained a curse, and across the door there was a sign that said, "Death shall fall upon all those who dare to enter this sacred space where the prince doth lie." But that didn't stop my dad. He wouldn't give up. He continued to bury his nose in every book he could find about ancient Egyptian codes and scripts. It just worried me, though. What if the curse was real? I didn't want my dad to die. Shortly after my 16th birthday, we flew to Egypt. He said the time had come, and that it was now or never. I told him I was coming with him, but he wouldn't let me. He said that I was too young, and that the air in the pyramid was too toxic for my young lungs to handle. That was the first time we had a proper fight. I wasn't about to let him go in there and die on his own. It was pointless arguing, though. He just kept saying no to me. We ended up staying in Egypt for weeks. I was starting to miss home and wondered if we'd ever go back. Then one day, Dad said he almost cracked the code. He asked if I'd mind staying just a few days more. Sure, I thought, but deep down, I was worried. He was starting to act a bit crazy. The next day, I decided to follow him. I didn't even know if what he was doing was legal. I kept at a safe distance from him, and then watched as he crawled through a small opening at the back of the pyramid. I waited about 5 minutes, then followed him in. I can hear that he wasn't that far away from me. His voice was echoing all through the tunnel, and he sounded like an insane person. He was muttering to himself, and occasionally, he'd burst out laughing. Then as I got closer to him, I heard him speaking to someone. I thought he was in there alone. So, who was he speaking to? Well, guess what? He was talking to voices in his head. He'd officially lost the plot. I thought about calling my grandmother back home and telling her, but she'd only worry. Honestly, my dad was acting like a maniac. He'd devoted his whole life to cracking this code, and so much so that he'd almost forgotten about me. Don't get me wrong, he was a great dad, but this was taking it too far. I got so distracted listening to him that I stopped looking where I was going, and suddenly, I banged into something. Then I screamed. It was my dad. I'd been caught in the act. I thought he'd start shouting at me, but instead he grabbed me and said, "Look, son, look there. Read the curse. I'm so close." Then he pointed to the curse, and there it was, written above the door for all to see. "Death shall fall upon all those who dare to enter this sacred space where the prince doth lie." I stayed in there with him as he worked on the last bit of the code, and he said he thought the next day he'd be able to get inside. But when we got back to the hotel, there was a message for us. My grandma had died that day. Suddenly, my dad broke down into hysterical tears and said the curse had come for him already. Then that night, I got a fever, and he started freaking out, saying it was all because of the curse, and even just touching the entrance to the tomb had obviously sent death our way. He changed our flight, and we flew home the next morning. My fever was so bad they almost didn't let us on the flight, but my dad was so frantic I think they got scared and let us on. My dad really thought I was going to die too. We made it back in time for my grandma's funeral, and my dad had become so crazy, I had to get a psychiatrist to come and visit him at home. Ever since that last trip, he has really lost his mind. And as for me, well, I'm determined to one day help my dad unlock that tomb. I refuse to believe that the curse is real. And what can I say? I guess I have developed a real passion for the ancient world, and I feel I owe it to my dad to discover all these secrets that lie hidden inside the pyramids, just waiting to be uncovered. Do you think I should go back to Egypt and try and break the code? Or should I forget it and move on with my life?